The first Digimon World game was a virtual pet simulator adventure game. Digimon World 2 was a turn-based dungeon crawler, and Digimon World 4 is a top-down hack and slash. So, with all that in mind, what kind of game do you think Digimon World 3 is? Well, it's definitely a lot of things. A charming, traditional, turn-based RPG, a greatest hit, a loving part of so many Digimon fans' childhoods. But it's also an incomplete game, with a steep learning curve that is padded beyond belief. And what will definitely piss off the majority of Digimon fans is this. One moment, let me just get this ready. It's a Pokemon clone. Oh, you don't believe me? Well, tell me, does this sound familiar? A young boy who absolutely loves monsters, but seemingly knows nothing about them, elects to go on an adventure with his two friends. An eager boy who recklessly chases after people he's interested in, and a girl that he constantly argues with. After selecting his monsters, he finds himself traveling between cities, battling random monsters and other tamers in turn-based combat, with the goal of defeating the lead tamer of each city to collect their badges, which he needs in order to enter a tournament and win to prove that he's the very best that ever was. But oh no, along the way an evil and kind of silly organization gets in the way, and you gotta stop them to save the world. Also, there's a card game. You see? Stop it! But obviously, Digimon World 3 wouldn't be the most beloved of the classic trilogy if that's all there was to it. Digimon World 3 is chock full of interesting ideas, charming visuals, and a lot of unexpected depth. It's no mere knockoff, but that's not always for the better. This game can be rough. So I decided to do something a little different for this review after hitting a handful of walls, literally 20 hours in, and I turned to all of you, the Digimon community, for help. And man, did you all digi-deliver. Nostalgic memories, reasons you love this game, and most importantly, how to go about enjoying this game to its fullest. Tips that I'm going to share with all of you along the way, starting with the first major tip that you absolutely need to know. Don't play it! What I actually mean is, you don't want to play Digimon World 3, you want to play Digimon World 2003. Which is to say you want to play the PAL version, aka the European version. Because while there are minor tweaks to the gameplay and balancing, the big one is that Digimon World 3 is missing a lot of post-game content, which includes quests, new gear, story, and extra boss fights. Basically, this version is incomplete. And if you're saying to yourself, I don't live in Europe to get that version, well, that's where the next big tip comes in. Emulate. Which is actually one of the main pieces of advice that you all gave me in order to improve Digimon World 2 as well. And it's not like this game is gonna see re-release anytime soon, so come on, you're not hurting anyone. And besides, even if you don't care about which version of Digimon World 3 you're playing, it's still an older JRPG, and the option to speed it up or remove random battles, stuff like that, can absolutely go a long way. Must be nice. But since I didn't find out any of this until I was like 20 hours in, this review is gonna stick to the vanilla US version of World 3. But of course, all of those tips are pretty moot either way if you don't actually like the game enough out the gate to keep with it. And to Digimon's credit, it has a strong start. Like its predecessors, the game opens up with an awesome CG cutscene that still holds up today, before dropping you off into the digital world, which visually easily curb stomps the first two games. Say goodbye to the drab and dull dungeons of Digimon World 2, and welcome back to the wackiness of Digimon World 1. Except brighter, more colorful, and the camera is actually pulled back enough that you can actually see it all. Sprawling plains, lush forests, rocky cliffs, all meshed together with circuitry, binary, and random man-made crap that just makes an interesting world to explore that you really don't see anywhere else. My personal favorite is this random hairdryer just plucked into the side of the mountain, melting the snow for seemingly no reason at all. I love it. There's just so much charm here, in big part due to the series moving away from pure 3D, which, let's be real, hasn't aged all that well, instead opting for 2D sprites that have held up way better. And just look at my Digimon following behind me, oh, it's precious! And these little training sequences are adorable. But all of that doesn't mean that there's no 3D. Honestly, the heartbeat I saw my 2D character for the first time, my immediate thought was, the combat's gonna be in 3D. And my gamer intuition did not let me down. But before we go full 3D and dive into the deep end of the battle system, we need to discuss the world a bit more. Because despite its charm, it has some major problems. But have no fear, as here is where I'm going to give you the final tip for improving the game. Which ironically is a combination of a lot of tips, as normally I'd have pro tips popping up here and there like get the counter crest, which is something I wish I had done. But then the screen would be more plastered with tips than a stock car is with ads. Okay, so without further ado, here it is, the absolute must, most important, universally agreed upon by every Digimon World 3 fan, pro tip you need to know in order to not just enjoy this game, but to basically play it at all. Use a guide! I'm serious. Despite my comparisons between the Digimon campaign and Pokemon's... Stop it! Obviously, there's more to it. Its own story, side quests, mechanics, and just so much more. And while the writing is very shallow, clearly made for kids, the gameplay most certainly is not. It's absolutely brutal at times and very unforgiving, feeling much more akin to early RPGs on the NES and PC than on the PlayStation. Now, being an RPG, I have no intention of spoiling the story for any of you beyond what I said about the Pokemon comparison. But what you do need to know is that this game basically gives you zero guidance around the halfway point, expecting you to just kind of figure it out of thin air by stumbling around and exploring every nook and cranny. I mean, just look at the absolute absurdity of the desert maze, and I think you'll understand. It's a lot like the looping puzzles in Zelda, you know, where you have to go the right direction in the right order in order to move forward. Except here, it's like 4 times the size of that, and there are no hints on where to go. I had actual Digimon World 3 fans, people who told me that this was their favorite game, yelling at me to look at a guide for this part. It is that BS. All of which is not helped by the insane amount of backtracking and padding. Seriously, this game is so padded, I could fill up Arkham Asylum to the point where all the villains would be so cozy that they'd give up crime. Oh, what, again? You don't believe me? Well, here, let me show you one of the earliest quests. Early on, we managed to make it to the second continent in the game, where we're on our way to the next town, only to find our path blocked by an impassable enemy. We find out that we need to return a Digimon's mask, and he'll help us get rid of that guy. So, where's the mask? Well, luckily for us, our friend is right outside, and tells us it's basically in the spooky area from earlier, all the way back on the previous continent. Great. So we get there only to find that we have to head back to the starting town in order to find the mask. But after searching around, guess who we find? It's our new friend who's already found his mask, who also now refuses to help us. Now, obviously, he couldn't have beaten us here and found the mask before us, but being an idiot, we believe him and head all the way back to the other side of the world, just to be told that wasn't him! So, it's all the way back to the other side of the world to confront the imposter, who is in another area now, by the way. And then we finally get what we need. All of which amounts to a really stupid joke and no boss fights. Seriously. And sadly, almost every quest in the game is like this. And yeah, I know what you're all thinking. And no, you never get fast travel. So enjoy trekking through the same area again and again, and even again, but now with a palette swap, all in a game with random battles, loads of dead ends, and small invisible walls that limit your movements. it quickly starts to chip away at the charm of the environment pretty fast, and any real desire to explore. And not to mention, it has some of the most unique and awkward loading that I have ever seen. Yes, I am going to talk about the loading. It is a PS1 game, there's gonna be loading, I accept that. Except here, it's just so weird. Instead of the game giving us the usual loading screen you'd expect, instead, each area has these blue boxes that vanish, revealing the map. Which is cool because you could start moving around while the rest of the map loads. Except these blocks appear every time you enter the screen. And I don't just mean moving from one area to the next. It also happens when returning from battles and even the menu. It's kind of a pain. You're gonna need some serious patience in order to just move around. But on the bright side, all of that pointless padding and loading is made much more tolerable thanks to a soundtrack that is absolute fire. Seriously, Digimon World's 3 tracks have no business being this good. And the best way I can describe them is just catchy and fun. Even the more chilling and depressing areas in the game are sporting upbeat earworms while still managing to fit the mood. And there are just so many different cheery tracks for different areas. I found myself humming along every single time I entered the main town. It's just so delightful. And those monsters at Bandai Namco really just know how to tug at my heartstrings. Using sound effects from Digimon World 1? You guys got me. And let's not forget about the boss battle music. It gets me pumped up to dive into some slow-paced, turn-based combat that is surprisingly deep and convoluted. It has a lot of those early red and blue vibes. Stop it! Like those early Game Boy games, battles are one-on-one affairs, with you able to swap out your active Digimon. Knock out all your opponent's mons, and you win. But lose, and it's game over. Nurse Joy isn't coming to rescue you this time. And while it all seems pretty basic on the surface, there's actually a lot more to it than meets the eye. The stars of the show are easily the Digimon themselves. At the start of the game, you get to pick your 3 starter Digimon, and fear not, you can always get the ones you didn't choose later on, but it is optional. And despite all the Pokemon comparisons, you don't actually tame wild Digimon either, which is actually kind of a shame. What you get instead are multiple Digivolutions for each of your 3 Digimon. In fact, every Digimon in the game can get every evolution if you're willing to commit to the grind, even though they can really only use 3 at a time. But being able to swap forms mid-fight, watching them Digivolve, is a major treat, especially when it comes from triggering the blast gauge. Hanging out in the upper right corner, the blast gauge fills up when you take damage, and once it maxes out, your Digimon will automatically warp Digivolve up 2 forms, with full health. A real game changer. Except that you have to take an absurd amount of damage to get there. Your Digimon will probably bite the dust a few times first, so you probably won't be using it all that much. But when it does trigger, it can make for some amazing anime-esque moments. Epic. But, as you probably guessed, there is a major catch to all of this. The grinding. This game heavily, and I mean heavily, expects you to grind if you want to get anywhere. And it is as slow as it can be. Like in Pokemon, in order to level up your Digimon, they have to participate in battle. So, switch training. The thing is though, that every Digivolution you get starts at level 1. So if you say reach level 99 with Greymon, you have to start at level 1 with Metal Greymon and War Greymon. Now imagine switch training with essentially 9 different Digimon in your party. Oh, and the Digimon, they can only go up 1 level per battle, regardless of the amount of experience gained. And that only scratches the surface. Now, as you'd expect, grinding does have its perks, and from what you all told me, is one of the things that you love, being able to work towards the Digimon evolution you want, all while unlocking new moves that can be used by other forms, granting you some very powerful mons by the end of the game, which you will need, as this battle system is not balanced. Definitely not kid-friendly. For starters, stats play a much more impactful role beyond damage dealt and received. In order to unlock specific evolutions, you need to meet certain stat thresholds. But in that pursuit, if your Digimon is too slow, your opponent will basically dodge everything you throw at them, as well as take turns back to back. And I swear it's always at the most inappropriate times. So much for turn-based. Also, like many RPGs, there is an element system, but it expects a lot more problem solving from you than say Pokemon does, giving you little to no hints along the way. For example, machine-type Digimon tend to be weak against electric and water attacks. Short-circuited, yeah, that makes sense. However, Puppetmon, also a machine Digimon, is made of wood. So...
fire!
All of which makes having prior Digimon knowledge, or let's say, a guide, all the more helpful. Not to mention just being able to tell by looks during a fight. But those looks. Alright, first, I just want to reiterate that visually, the combat is completely 3D. PS1 3D. I'm not about to go ragging on the jagged edges or stuff like that. Set your expectations accordingly. My real beef, however, is just how slow and lazy it all feels. Animations take a bit too long and are unskippable, plus some minor loading. Makes the combat feel really slow. And while the Digimon themselves do look awesome, some attacks are real showstoppers, and the DNA Digivolution is an absolute throwback, the majority of the attacks end up just being generic balls of light. Compare that to Digimon World 2, where most of the attacks had more unique looking animations, and the Digimon actually said the attack names. Plus, there weren't as many recolors or fights due to the lack of random battles, so really, this all kind of feels like a major step back. Overall, the combat is a real slog, especially if you don't know or can't utilize the enemy's weaknesses. And if you don't have the counter crest to help cheese the fights, or didn't put enough points into speed so you can actually hit them, I think you're gonna have a bad time. But if you do put in the effort, the more Digivolutions you unlock and abilities you gain greatly broadens your options, making everything feel much more tactical and fun. Basically, you just gotta put in the work if you really want to enjoy this one, which is the overall sentiment. It is just loaded with so many problems, from balancing to lack of guidance on where to go, to what is in my opinion its biggest flaw, the literal hours worth of padding. Like half the game is just sending you back and forth to the same areas again and again. However, if you take the right steps to circumvent those issues, aka use a guide, play the PAL version, and maybe emulate, then you will find yourself amidst a quirky JRPG that rewards exploration and experimentation. Honestly, while I did enjoy this game the further I got into it, I am in complete agreement with the majority of the fans of this game that it is just begging for a proper remake with quality of life improvements, which the 2003 version only accommodates so much. But let's be real here, a game that basically screams at you, buy the strategy guide, isn't good game design no matter how you spin it, and thus Digimon World 3 definitely won't be for everyone. Unless you are a hardcore retro gamer or a massive Digimon fan, I'd give this game a pass. At least until it gets a remake.